When I was approached by Amazfit to test out their T-Rex 3 watch, I was a little skeptical. I've been a pretty solid member of the iOS ecosystem for a few years now. And now that I've been wearing this thing for about a month, I can say unequivocally, it does literally everything better than the watch I was wearing before. I was really grumpy about my lack of battery life on my watch. This thing lasts 27 days. Did you hear what I just said right there? This watch will last 27 days. It connects to iOS. It connects to Android. It has 25 strength training movements and 8 sports movements. It'll track your pickleball games. It'll track your calories as you are wearing it. It's got so many health-related functions, I can't even go into it on this particular ad. But you guys should definitely check out the T-Rex 3 by Amazfit. That is us.amazfit.com, amazfit.com/402p. You get 15% off of your T-Rex 3 by using the promo code 402p. And that, again, is at us.amazfit.com. It is now my favorite sports watch.
Welcome to 4.0 to Pro, the pickleball podcast that focuses on a single shot, tip, or strategy to improve your pickleball game with every single pocket-sized episode. Our goal is to make you better on the court every time you hear our voices.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of 4.0 to Pro, your pocket-sized pickleball podcast, where we teach you a single shot or strategy every single episode. I'm Michael O'Neill here in not-so-sunny Long Beach, California, joined by my good bud, Mircea in Boca Raton, Florida. Yo, bro, what's up?
What's up, my man? Good to see you and talk to you, as
Thanks,
usual.
Man. Yeah, we're doing a fun show today. If you guys haven't noticed, we've been sort of going through the catalog and revisiting some of the I would say old, a year and a half ago shows that we did like a year and a half ago. A lot of the times because the game has evolved so quickly because of these Gen 3 paddles, A, and B, we have like this brainiac of a thinker on the show now, and the strategic element of the game can be applied to all of these different shots that we've spoken about in the past. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool to kind of apply your big brain to these particular scenarios?
Thank you for the very generous oversell there. I appreciate it very much. But before we get going, I do want to have a really honest bit of gratitude to, number one, our listeners, and number two, all the amazing people that have been coming up to me and telling me that they're listening to the podcast and they're getting something out of it and they're implementing it in their games, both in rec games and tournaments. It's incredibly gratifying and really kind, and we're really grateful. I'm personally grateful, I know you are as well, for all the positive feedback, and we really, really appreciate it.
You have a story behind that?
It was pretty funny. Last weekend, played with some local friends, and one of them was a fellow NPL alumnus, Shea Coker. And Shea was a tall guy, hits really hard, but has really been developing his soft game as well. And he had a really good record at the NPL. So he came out, there was a foursome, and he says, just listen to the podcast, really good stuff. And the other players asked, you have a podcast? We very briefly discussed it. And so we went out and played. And then I started off with Shea, and Shea was playing the left. I was playing the right. I served. The opponent returned to Shea. Shea hit a drop drive, so a drip. And he's also a tall, lanky guy, and he moves fairly quickly. He gets a pop-up for a fourth, and he goes up and proceeds to crush the fifth for winner. So we're up 1-0. So right before I serve, I just say, hey, not for nothing, but he's listening to the podcast. I'm just saying. So for the rest of the time, anytime someone hit the winner, said, he listened to the podcast, or someone made it in there, I didn't listen to the podcast. So it was a little bit of a humorous, joyous part of our podcast listening audience that came up there. So really appreciated it.
I love that. It's happened now for me probably more than a half a dozen times in different cities. New York, in Denver, in Boulder, here in Anaheim, where I was warming up on a court and the woman who had nothing to do with, like, she was in a completely different bracket, kind of looks over and goes, "Is your name Michael?" And I go, "Yeah." And she goes, oh, I listened to the podcast. I recognize your voice. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. And it's maybe part of the thing with having an audio only show is that people's voices really, really resonate. Like it's something we're in their ears. They're on the treadmill. They're driving to the pickleball courts, hopefully right now, listening to this. And so when they hear it, it's almost like a dog hearing their name, and it kind of perks up. You kind of hear the voice and go, oh, I know that voice. So really quickly, a clinic update. Many of you have written us about the clinics we spoke about Q1 of 2025. I've got quite a bunch of people on my list, and we have slightly more information, but this is kind of what it's shaping up to be. We're thinking of it being sort of a 4-day event. The first day is for VIPs. We're going to take 4 VIPs that will get there on a single day, and we'll work with them individually. So it'll be like a full day with just those 4 people. That evening, we'll meet everybody that'll come into town, and we'll kind of do a meet and greet, and then we'll do 2 full days of clinic. And then that third day, people will be flying out. But if we have enough people around, we can have open play or a little round robin or something like that. We have a lot of fun surprises for everybody who attends. So if you are interested in that, you can reach out at picklehelp.com. Send me the message. You can also reach out at 4.0 to pro on Instagram. That's the number 4.0 to pro on Instagram. Or 40 to pro, which is all spelled out, FOUROHTOPRO @gmail.com. And by the way, if you haven't already, you can follow the show at 4.0 to pro on Instagram. You can follow me at Solo Hour, SOLOHOUR, and you can follow Mircea at BrainsDoc, BRAINSDOK on the gram. What did I say? DOK? DOC, yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, BrainsDoc, BRAINSDOC on Instagram. So let's talk about fourths. It's kind of the redheaded stepchild of pickleball shots. Mm-hmm. Everyone's very, very into their thirds and their drives and their drops, but the fourth really doesn't get enough love.
And it needs a lot of love.
It needs a lot of love. The way that I've been playing it, and it's funny because I continue to meet up with people that I started playing with 4 years ago, but maybe I haven't seen them on the court in a while. And I do often get like, man, you've gotten a lot better since the last time we played. I was like, man, I've had a couple of pros in my ear for a year and a half, and I edit all these shows. So a lot of these things that we drill and talk about are constantly drilled into my brain in the 3 hours it takes me to edit these podcasts after we record the 20-minute show. So let me tell you, Mircea, where I am with fourths, and then we'll apply some of your BrainsDoc magic and talk about how that may have evolved in 2024 with these modern paddles and a lot of cerebral thinking. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay. So today, it was a really great example. I played with some good players today, including a really bombastic Tiffany, who's a lefty, 5-point something. And she was just such a pleasure to play with because I could hit a drive on my third and they would attempt to hit a fourth and that fifth was not coming back. She was attacking it and it was really good. But on my fourths, so if I was on the left-hand side on my fourths and let's say I'm returning, I tend to try to hit it to the, in this case, the server who's coming up. I try to hit it to their low backhand as I'm making my way up to the non-volley zone. And that worked very well for us today because I could sometimes swing them out wide. They'd get the ball back in the court, but then my lefty monster partner could just put it away because it was kind of a pop-up. And that worked really well. When I was on the right side, and let's say I was the one already up at the net, I was always looking for a poachable third. If it was a high third, I was looking to attack it. And I would really try to squeeze in towards the center to really narrow their target as much as I possibly could. Now, if they had a really great drive and they could rip it down the line, I had to be wary of that. But in general, I liked to take court away from them when I was the partner that was already up at the net and really kind of prowl on that ball and make sure they knew early on if they hit a high third, they're in trouble. And I'm going to really try to make them pay for that. So that's like sort of a general overview of how I play the fourth. And let's get into some specifics.
Well, you brought up some really good points, and this brings us to the responsibilities of the returner and the responsibilities of the player up at the kitchen line or at the net. So they're a little bit different, but you're there to help each other as a team. How do you set up a fourth? I like to think about this conceptually by thinking about how to set up my partner for a good fourth. And most people don't think of it that way. And it really starts with a return. So if you are returning deep and to a person's weaker shot or weaker wing, that will allow your partner who's up at the kitchen line to get an easier fourth. If you hit a short, fluffy return that's a little bit high and in the middle of the court to someone's strong forehand, your partner may get crushed. So really, the setup for the fourth starts with the return. And we go back to the communication, which, as we all know, is a running theme. So you want to communicate, hey, where are we returning? That's part of your responsibility, is to think about where you're returning. And this is something you don't have to discuss for, 3 hours. All you have to say is, hey, let's target this person, or this person's backhand, or wherever it might be.
What I do in that case, Mircea, is I break it down even as simple as I'm returning red if they're wearing a red jersey, or returning green, or I'm returning red backhand, or something like that. It's almost like they're nameless gray faces, and I'm not that interested. I'm just trying to target whatever that specific shot is.
And whatever way you choose to communicate effectively, do that. My mixed doubles partner, Anna Shirley, used to always ask me right before she would return, where do you want me to return? And I often do the same thing with my partners, especially if we're not able to get up to the kitchen easily as we're returning, or we're having a hard time setting up the kitchen exchange like we want. So anyway, back to the communication. It's really important to have some targets and communicate those targets with your partner. So that's number one. Number two, what are your player responsibilities when you're up at the kitchen? And I like the concept that you were describing about feeling like you're prowling up there, like you're hunting for a ball, and you want to put, number one, you want to put pressure on your opponents. That's one of your responsibilities. And your other responsibility is to try to help your partner get up to the kitchen line with you. And there's a few different ideas behind this, but the gist is, when your partner hits a good return, if you are up at the kitchen already, you want to kind of prowl that middle and clog that middle in some fashion to try to get an easier ball to put pressure on your opponents. And then also, when your partner is returning, by crouching more to the middle, it can also narrow the lane of your opponent's drives. So for example, let's say you and I are playing and you're on the right and I'm up at the kitchen on the left, and I want you to return straight ahead or kind of straight towards the middle. So you return directly in front of you to the person that's on the left. I would pinch middle as soon as you hit that return. That way, it allows me to cover you a little bit, so that person on the left doesn't have a huge lane down the middle to drive that ball. Even if I don't take the ball, which I often do if I can, if I can get over far enough and reach it, and I can predict where the ball is going, even if I don't take the ball, it allows you to get an easier ball. The biggest thing is, when you're up at the kitchen, your partner's returning, don't be static. Don't just watch. And that's probably one of the biggest things I see as a mistake in the 3-0, 3-5, 4-0s. People don't actively move. And the only way they move is they turn their head to see their partner return, and then they turn their head to see what their opponents are doing.
Let me ask you this. If you're playing right side and your partner has just returned, let's say cross court, they return to the middle, the other team's left side player is about to wind up on a forehand, and you're there playing right side. Now you've shifted to the middle of the court. How far will you go?
I try to do the same as when I'm on the left side and I'm already up at the kitchen line.
So like full straddle?
I will fully straddle that center line, especially if the ball comes hard like a drive. If I can pick it off or reach it, basically that allows my partner to get up to the line, and I try to protect my partner by getting that ball. I put pressure on my opponents by hitting the ball more quickly, so the ball comes back to them more quickly, forcing them to make a decision more quickly. And if it is a soft floater in the middle of the court and I'm going to be hitting a defensive shot with my backhand in the middle, then I will generally leave that for my partner, because they are coming up with a forehand. Presuming that they're relatively speedy or they are mobile, then that ball can bounce and then they can do something with their forehand, something offensive. And this is a general rule when you're on the right, that if you have a ball that you're hitting below the net and you're hitting a soft ball, meaning that your opponents have it a drop or say even a dink, if you're going to take that with your backhand, you're going to hit a defensive shot. Usually you want to leave that for the left side player because they have a forehand and they can be more offensive.
Right. You and I actually had that. I intercepted a couple of balls that were yours when I was playing right side with you. I'm much more cognizant about it now. And I call it a hockey save. Like you're, like trying to save a hockey puck in the net. If you have to stab to your backhand, that's not the shot. You let your partner hit that.
If you're off balance or you're hitting it below the net for clearly a defensive shot, and don't sell yourself short, Michael. You took at least 30 balls that were mine last
30.
time we played.
One of these days I'll get a single compliment from you about my game. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm holding out hope that it'll happen before the end of the year.
You did adjust in that very last game, so I want to compliment you on that.
Well, never on this show. It's never been public. This episode of 4.0 to Pro is brought to you by BetterHelp. The holidays can be particularly tough for some people. For instance, I lost my parents many years ago, and the holidays can be a little rough for me sometimes. It's always nice when I have somebody I can talk to about how I'm feeling as I go through the holiday season. Therapy can be a great way to bring me some comfort that never goes away, even when the season changes. If you've ever thought of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and perfectly suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime you want for no additional charge. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/402p to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/402p. So one thing I want to note, especially when you're playing against these modern Gen 3 paddles, and this is something that we couldn't have talked about on this first go round of this episode, is those things are coming in hot. Those drives are really something. When they're being hit by someone who's very capable, and a lot of tennis folks are coming over to pickleball now, the ball's dipping crazy. The velocity is crazy. Balls that would be 4 feet out a year and a half ago are now 4 feet in because of the spin they can get on those paddles. So even though we've preached it literally since day one, I cannot stress enough that the most important thing when you're about to face a super hard drive on that third shot is that you split step before your opponent hits it or while they're hitting it, and you are so utterly stable when that ball is contacting your paddle because it's coming in hot. And today with this group, I knew that this woman was going to keep ripping it, and she did. And I was so cognizant, sometimes not even all the way up into the non-volley zone. I'd hit the return. She'd be all over it, sometimes a little earlier. And so I'd be kind of mid-transition zone or maybe deep a little bit towards the kitchen. But man, I said, whew, no matter where I am, I'm going to stabilize and get ready for this shot. And that was the winning strategy. I was able to really stabilize. And very often, I'll keep both hands on a paddle because, again, some of these things are coming in so hot that I find that if I just take my left hand off and it goes to my backhand or to my body, I feel like that the paddle in my arm is compressing sometimes too much. And it's nice to have that left hand on there just to kind of stabilize the entire thing. So no matter what, especially if you're handling one of these Yolas or a gearbox or maybe one of the new carbons that's coming out very soon, just make sure you guys are ready for that sucker and that you are as stable as you possibly can be.
It's absolutely critical. You have to make the decision of whether you're going to let the ball go or whether you're going to hit it with these drives, with these super hot paddles. So it's really hard to make that decision while you're moving through the ball. And I always say the extra few feet of real estate you're gaining by moving as quickly as you can to the kitchen and not stopping when your opponents are about to hit the ball or as they're striking the ball, the extra real estate you're getting is not worth the loss of stability.
Right. So to help clarify the choices we have while we're at this line waiting for this fourth shot, this is how I clarify it. Mircea, you can correct me if I'm wrong or add or subtract anything you want. My first choice is if the ball is attackable, it's above the net, maybe it's shoulder high or whatever, I'm going to do my best to keep them back. I'm going to try to hit it towards the baseline as much as I can. Now, I realize there's been a trend of drop shots in pickleball, and there's some legitimacy to it, especially when you're in the middle of like an overhead battle and they're 4 feet beyond the baseline. But I still stick to, let me keep them back if I can. I'm going to try to keep them back. I will tend to hit it towards their backhand if I can. So I'm kind of railing on that right rear corner from my perspective. So it's the left side player's backhand, if they're assuming they're righty. I tend to do that a lot. And that tends to work out for me. So that's let's keep them back if the ball is attackable. Now, if it's a middle ball, meaning like it's kind of iffy, it's maybe just below the net, I've got enough of a roll on the forehand or backhand side that I can get it over, but it's not really offensive. This is the shot I like to hit at their feet. This is a ball that I'm sort of targeting feet of that person who's coming up. And I'm going to try to make them dig out a ball if I can. And then finally, let's say they hit a great drop. And okay, you've done it. Well done. Congratulations. You've hit a great drop. This is a surrender type dink. I don't have any offense that I can apply to this. It's dropping. It's maybe bounced in front of me or it's shin height. There's not a ton I can do with it. I'm just going to try to get this over. I generally tend to hit this ball slightly more cross court because I have a little bit more real estate there. I can pop it up a little bit higher without as much of a penalty that I don't pop it up right to the person who's in front of me because then that kind of gets me hosed. But if it's a great drop, I think that's one of the things that the other partner that's already at the net also has to recognize that if my ball's a bit of a pop-up, we've got to eject and get a couple feet back and get in our defensive positions because the other team can rip it.
One of the things that you want to discuss is who you're targeting in the transition zone or who you're targeting to keep them back. One player may have much better defense than the other, so you might want to target that player. And one person may also have much better defense with their backhand than their forehand. This came up the other day when we were playing. One of my partners kept targeting this one other player's backhand, and while it was his weaker shot when he's at the baseline and when he's at the kitchen, ironically, in the transition zone, it was his best shot. He was most comfortable resetting with his backhand. So I said, hey, let's try the forehand. And magically, we got all these pop-ups and errors when we were targeting that particular spot. So targeting a player, targeting their feet, whether you're targeting a backhand or forehand in the transition zone is also important to talk about. The other thing that I really like to do is go middle, especially on a higher ball. If you have a high ball that you control, poke it low down the middle and that squeezes them together, makes them choose, makes them stretch. I really like to go middle, and I really don't like to go to the sideline. I try to take 10% of the court off on each side where I just don't hit to those spots. I usually don't miss wide. If I miss, I'll be deep or in the net. And the reason for this, and I'm trying to just share all the errors that I made, is that I try to go hard to the sidelines and get angles multiple times. And while I've made most of them, just way too many errors. So just take the sidelines out of your repertoire, especially if you have a high ball in the middle and it's a fourth. Either just go down in the middle or just go down at your opponent's feet. You're going to get, even if they get it back, it's usually another pop-up. The biggest mistake that people often make is try to hit it back hard. So you have to hit it over the net, number one. And then number two, when you're hitting it hard, your opponents are going to get the ball either waist high or higher. Don't compound the problem by trying to hit an aggressive shot when your opponents have hit a really good shot.
We've had this ongoing theme of communication. And by the way, one of the things I did today, Mircea, which was kind of cool, is I was playing with a brand new person I'd never met before. And I asked her, I said, what do you like from your mixed partners? How do you like your mixed partners to play? And she was like, oh, I really like blah, blah, blah. And it was like, okay, that was good. And I really took notes on that. And we ended up playing very well together. So communication.
Great.
And yeah. And so, and this is something I really think that you've brought to the show in such a great way, which is you really think about every ball. You want to talk to your partner. You want to find out where you're going to return. I know you like to say, let's return to the wing that doesn't hurt us. Like the other day, I was playing with a new paddle. I haven't ever hit better drives or better serves in my entire pickleball life. And they kept hitting me forehands in the middle. And I was like, I don't know what they're doing because these balls are coming back 300 miles an hour and they're staying in the court. And I'm looking at the paddle going, I don't even know how I'm doing this. But it was just one of those magic, I wish I could bottle it kind of days. But they should have been like, don't hit it to that guy's forehand. That should have been a conversation that happened. And it very rarely happens in rec play as much as it should.
Absolutely. And this kind of gets into the recognition aspect of it and the adjustments. You and your partner are returning and your opponents are getting either to the kitchen or up in the point every single time. Let's try to figure out why. And this is a little utilized skill, I feel, that really needs to be emphasized. If someone is hurting you or they're hitting a great shot, let's try not to give them that. Let's try something else. Now, you may still end up losing or getting down in the point, but at least let's try something different. So if we're returning to Joe and Joe is crushing thirds and his partner Frank is shaking and baking and just smoking us with their fifths, let's just try returning to the other guy or the other lady or whatnot. So It sounds really simple and intuitive, yet it often doesn't happen. And you really have to be paying attention in order to recognize that. It
is weird how little these conversations happen in rec play. I think they happen in tournaments a lot. There's some money at stake and people have paid money to play in the tournament and that kind of thing. But I think we all like to win. But I think more importantly, we all want to learn the right strategies to get us to that next level. And that always comes down to identification of what's hurting us on the other side of the court, steering away from that, and then doing our best to counter to our ability. I think that where the technical side runs into the cerebral side is that sometimes you go, oh, we should be hitting this shot to that person, but you don't have that shot yet. It's not in your arsenal. So that's why you get out and you drill that particular shot so that when it comes up again, you can actually hit that shot. That's why we drill very specifically.
Yeah, this is a skill that you have to work on. The recognition aspect. How do you work on that? You work on it during your rec games. So you play your rec games with intent and you can say, okay, I'm going to try to recognize who is hitting the better thirds. Who am I returning to that is giving my partner better fourths? Where am I returning to that's giving my partner better fourths? And I always say that if you're not doing this in your rec play or practice or drilling, if you're not developing those skills, you are not going to be able to implement those in a competitive match under a pressure type situation unless you've done it tens hundreds, maybe thousands of times as you're playing rec games. And we want to go from 4.0 to pro, right? So that's what the goal is. We want to get better. And you have to practice your cognitive skills in addition to your technical skills.
I think one thing that we've spoken about a couple of episodes ago that's so important for this particular thing, and you alluded to it earlier, which is your return really sets up the fourth. If you're getting walloped with shake and bakes, being someone's going to drive a third, then it blasts off one of our paddles as the fourth, and then that partner comes in and puts it away on the fifth, we can take that person out of the mix by returning to them. The person that's on the prowl and attacking that drive, we can take them out of it by returning to them. Then they can't attack anymore. Now they have to hit the third. Now, if you happen to run into a team that they both have amazing drives, then okay, that's fine. Yeah, I would still rather face a good drop than a killer drive, just because of the damage that a great, accurate, hard drive can do. Versus, well, at least a drop we can surrender, but then at least we have a chance because we're in this 4-person ritual kitchen exchange situation. But that happened a bunch today. She's attacking. I'm going to hit to her on the return. And now I've got a manageable kind of fourth. Let's talk about the stacking situation, Mircea, and how you modify this to that particular scenario.
In terms of unstacking, it's really important to talk about where you're returning. And what I like to do in terms of positioning, especially when I'm unstacking, is I like to give my partner a really wide open lane, if you will, to completely open up the court and allow her to return either cross court or up the line or wherever she wants by standing about 5 to 6 feet back from the kitchen line. And then as she's returning, as the ball is returned, I quickly get into my position where I want to be. So if I'm on the right and she's returning from the left, I will stand back on the right side about 6 feet back. And then as soon as she returns, I really will cross over and get right up there, generally in the middle, especially if she's returning cross court.
So you're just giving her room or him room to return it anyway, any spot they want, basically.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay.
One of the other ways that you can do this is that if my partner, for example, she's returning on the left and I want to be the left side dominant player, I want to stay on the left, one of the options besides switching is for me to be on her side of the court on the sideline, standing just outside the sideline. And then when she returns, she runs over to the right and I just kind of shift right in there. The reason I don't like that is because I want to get over the middle and it takes me a while, and the opponents generally know that they can hit it almost anywhere, and I feel that that really opens up their options quite a bit. So I really don't like the unstacking version when one person is all the way to one side. There's one exception: if someone has limited mobility and they are the person that's supposed to be up at the kitchen line, then it's much easier for them to just shuffle over a few feet from the sideline rather than switching all the way across.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it gets pretty techie, but that's why this particular shot can maybe be sneaky effective. To me, the biggest takeaway of this whole episode, if you literally learned nothing else, and I hope you learned a lot, is that when you are that person up at the net, you should not be static. You should absolutely be moving and putting pressure on them, really reading where the ball is going and taking over the middle so they don't feel like they can just rip what we call a field goal, rip it right down the middle, and then that's it. And that happens sometimes when you have one of the two players, if you're playing straight up, meaning you're switching. I've played with plenty of players that don't know to cover middle that way, and they don't know to be big in the middle. And I have to tell them, I really want you to be big. I always say, I'm your Colin Johns when I'm over here. So you just take all this, you get all this kind of stuff. And I think it opens up the doors for them a little to take balls that maybe they wouldn't by default. As that person that's waiting at the net, be on the prowl, be looking for attackable balls. And for God's sake, even if you're on the right, make them think about hitting right to the middle because you're going to be there.
Absolutely. And don't forget, the beauty of pickleball is that you don't have to be physically big to have a big, imposing presence as the player up at the kitchen line when your partner's returning. So like you said, be big and impose your presence on the other team. Put pressure on them. And that's really your primary responsibility in addition to helping your partner come up.
I feel good about this. I feel like we have a pretty good game plan. And as always, Mircea, thank you for applying your your brainy overlay to our simple pickleball game and turning it from checkers into chess.
Thank you, my friend. That's what it's all about.
Folks, you've now just listened to another episode of 4.0 to Pro, as always, and we would love, if you haven't done it already, if you haven't rated and reviewed this show. Apple Podcasts is number one if you're an Apple user and you listen on Apple Podcasts. Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really makes a huge difference. The algorithm picks us up and sticks us into that top 200, and when that happens, good things happen for us. Same thing on Spotify. If you're a Spotify person, that's cool too. Thank you guys. As always, go enjoy the pickleball courts. For Mircea, I am Michael. We will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to 4.0 to Pro. For more tips, find us on Instagram at 4.0 to Pro. If you have a pickleball question, submit it at picklehelp.com. Now, get out there and dominate. But don't forget to have fun.